Love is the hallmark of our Christian faith. It's what makes the church the church. Everything we do, from worship to fellowship and mission, and more, is driven and shaped and influenced by God's love for us, and our love for God and our love for one another. The mutual love shared within and among the community of faith is the most powerful witness of the gospel that we have in the world. When church folks love each other, it creates a kind of community in which others want to be part of and naturally are drawn to. For we all would want to be part of a community where love is the center and the core and the essence of it. Today I want to continue the Life Together sermon series and speak on the topic, keeping the not so easy command to love one another. The not so easy command to love one another. The sermon text is John, the Gospel of John, chapter 13, verse 34 and 35. A new command I give you, love one another as I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this, everyone would know that you are my disciples if you love one another. Chapter 13 of the Gospel of John, the disciples have gathered with Jesus in the celebration of the Passover. It's a passage where Jesus decides that he's going to wash the feet of his disciples and demonstrate to them what is to really be a servant leader and to love them. And before the meal is completed, before they depart, he will reveal who will betray him, which is Judas. And he will let Peter know that Peter will deny him. It's in the midst of this kind of betrayal and uncertain environment in which the disciples find themselves that Jesus commands them to love one another. It's the only command that he gave to the disciples and that he has given to the church, to us, is to love one another. Jesus wants them to know that the brand, as we say it in marketing and business, or the trademark of the church is love. Of being a disciple is love. If you want to know disciples of Christ, look for the measure of love in them. When everything seeks to divide them and to drive them away from each other, he wants them to have love for one another, because that love for one another would draw them closer to God, closer to each other, and eventually and ultimately will be the driving force for them to go out into the world after he's left them and continue the mission of the gospel in the world. Now, the command to love one another is not new. We find in the Old Testament that in Deuteronomy that God had called the people to love him with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. And also we find in Leviticus to love your neighbor as yourself. What is new is that little phrase that they are to love one another as Jesus loved them. That's the real heart of this message, in terms of that's what he's trying to convey to them. A love that is going to be finalized and expressed in his death on the cross. That's where he's headed as he's moving towards Jerusalem. That's why there's going to be a betrayal and the denial, because his love will ultimately be manifested when he gives up his own life. He gives it away. They don't take it from him. He gives it to them. A love that is unconditional, a love that he loved. I mean, think of it. He knew Judas would betray him, and he loved him till the end and broke bread with him. He knew that Peter would deny him, and that Thomas, who once had said, let's go with Jesus and we will die with him, was the one that will say, now that he's resurrected, I will, until I see him, I don't believe it. An unconditional love, a love with no limits, no parameters. That love is also the same love that we get from him. A love that knows no boundaries or no restriction. And that's the love of God in Jesus Christ, a love that we seek one and at times try to do our best to do. But it's a love that's unconditional, sacrificial, no limits, boundless, never ending, without restriction. And he tells them, you are to love one another, but it's also the message for us in this morning as we think about life together as a community of faith. To love as Jesus has loved us. John, the book of John, chapter 4, verse 19 states, we love each other because he first loved us. He loved us first. And because he loved us first, we can begin to love others. Author and pastor Rick Warren writes, when we know and feel God's love for us, it changes us. It turns somebody who's hateful and bigoted or racist into a kind and gentle, loving person. When God's love comes into your life, it changes you, how you react and treat everyone else. You cannot help it but to pass it on to others. The love of God is the love that transforms and changes us to reflect the presence of Jesus. And when you're filled with that love, when that love fills you, there's nothing else we can do but to do it, to love, and pass it on to others. The love command, the command to love within and among the members of the faith community, because this text is really about faith community, is about them, the disciples. It's not about love your neighbors yourself. This is about loving those within the faith community. And we know that love extends beyond that, but the context of the text is to help us to think about loving as we participate in community. See, we think it's easier than maybe loving our neighbor or loving our enemies, but there's nothing easy about keeping the command to love one another, even in the context of the community of faith. Because, it's like living with someone. If you want to know if your love is going to be tested, live with someone long enough. Am I alone? Get tested every day. More than once a day. It's when you're together. If your children will test your love, you know that. Your grandchildren, well, you're more merciful to them, but they can take you to the edge as well, especially when they're 15 and 17. Love is tested when we live in community, when we abound in relationships. So it's not as easy, and I like to put that in parentheses, just to make us aware that we're not trying to oversimplify what we know that is always a task, a challenge, and we need God's grace to do it, whether it's loving our brothers and sisters or loving those near us. Because you see, we often draw lines about who we will love and who will be, and we will be tempted to cast those in the row of less loving in our lives, in our church. I mean, we struggle with that. Let's be honest. Let's be real. We draw lines when people's political, theological, cultural ideas are different from ours. Loving gets tested there. It gets tested when they come at it differently. Or their race or sexual identity or social status or ideas about the church challenges our embedded theologies and ideologies, but most importantly, it challenges our nature to love that which is different from us. And that's the challenge. Our love is even tested by those that we seem unlovable and difficult to be. There are some people that is not easy for you to be with. I mean, let's be honest from here. Let's face it. I mean, we're not going to paint this scenario because we're all adults in this church, right? Amen. See a lot of gray hair back there. It's tested also when people unintentionally or knowingly hurt us. That's when it really gets bombarded. When someone hurts you, especially someone that you trusted, that you confide, that was your friend, and there's that betrayal. Boy, does that hurt. It hurts so deep and so hard that it's tested your love. Your practice of love is tested. Author Scott McKnight writes, "Love is a great idea and a wonderful vision until we realize how challenging it is." It is. If you ask a couple that's been together 25, 50 years, or 70 years, or a little more, they'll tell you that it's been a wonderful ride, but it hasn't always been easy because love is always tested. And so is the love tested in the community of faith. It's tested when you're in a committee meeting and one of your colleagues is pushing you in a different direction. Or when you're leading the session and it goes on and on and on. It gets tested and so on. And one thing we know about the Christian church history is that we've missed the mark on loving one another. As one scholar writes, the church witness to the world is always hurt and diminished by hatred and lack of love that marks Christian dealing with one another. We know that is part of our history. All you got to do is open the history books and realize that we have missed it. The love one another command is undermined and crippled by division and discord and disagreement and differences among Christians. But God and God's mercy continues to reconcile us and continues to help us to reconcile to one another and to find ways of loving and living and caring, supporting and nourishing one another. Paul in Colossians writes, "Above all, clothe yourselves with love, which binds us together in perfect harmony." Love brings us together in perfect. When things seek to tear us apart, love can hold us together, but we must both mutually be in there. And when Paul is writing Colossians, the verses before that, he tells them when you put love on, we are to be kind, because love is manifested in our gestures, in our actions, in our words. To be kind, to be gentle, to be merciful to one another, he writes in those verses before, leading to clothe yourself with love. He says, make room for one another's faults. Make room. We're imperfect. We miss it. We miss the mark. We say there are some days that, we get out of bed and we should really stay in bed all day. We're just in one of those moods that we're in. Or with days that, if you've got someone dealing with chronic pain, that changes you in so many ways and difficult. But we are to be merciful and to make room for others' faults. And we are to forgive, yes, because one of the expressions of love is to forgive one another. To forgive. Not easy at times. A challenge for us, depending on our upbringing, depending on the hurt and what happened. But we're challenged by the gospel to love one another, and to love one another means to forgive as Christ has forgiven us. Love binds us together when everything else seeks to tear us apart. It's love that can hold us in the most difficult and challenging time. Jesus said, the world would know you by your love. Plain and simple. He said, the world will know you by how good we sing, how good we preach, how good we know the Bible, how good we lead a committee, how good we make a difference of all the mission work that we do. What he says is, it's your love. And our love is really the expression of the presence of Christ, and that's how the world will know us. It will bear witness that we are followers of Christ. Paul, writing to Corinthians, a church dealing with discord and divisions and disagreements, and some feeling that they were more spiritual than the others because they had this gift and that gift, and they felt they were gifted. Even the communion was a mess. Sometimes because in those days you had communion with a meal, and by the time some people got there, the food was gone. Everybody ate the food. And he tells them this on chapter 13 that we call the chapter of love, that we often use for weddings. But that chapter was written to help the Corinthian community find a way to love each other. And he says in verses 4-7, love is patient, love is kind, it does not envy, it does not boast, it is not proud, it does not dishonor others, it is not self-seeking, it is not easily angered, it keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, and always perseveres. What if we replace the word love with our name? That's something that one of our members of the church recently spoke to the youth and used this illustration and was shared with me during Tuesday morning staff meeting as we talked about this sermon. So what if I use my name? Don't worry, my name. Pablo is patient. Pablo is kind. Pablo does not envy, does not boast, is not proud. Pablo does not dishonor others, is not self-seeking. Pablo is not easily angered, keeps no record of wrong. Pablo does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. Pablo always protects, trusts, and hopes, and always perseveres. Or if we replace my name and we put Moorings and went on and on and on the church. The question is, when we read it and when I read it this way, do I measure up to that? Is it true that I or you or we live that love that Paul describes in Corinthians? When we do, however, when we fight and work hard to love in such a way, and we know we're going to come short at times, that's fine. God's grace is there for us. This is not a down sermon. This is an up sermon. God's grace is there for us. But when we do, it opens up the possibilities and the power of living in community with others, with Jesus, and with one another. Ain't it great when you're with someone and you feel the bonding of that love, the powerful, you break a meal with someone within or even outside of the church, and your family, and you could feel that love is such a powerful expression of community life and so transforming. This is what Paul is asking the Corinthian church. So in closing, when love prevails among believers, especially in times of disagreements and challenging times, it presents to the community and to the world an indisputable mark that we're true followers of Jesus Christ. It really shares to the world that we are followers because of our love. When others see that we're kind and merciful and understanding of each other's fault and we forgive one another, they are drawn to Jesus, but they're also drawn to the church, wherever the church might be. So I invite you, my friends and brothers and sisters, let us, with God's help, keep and live out the not-so-easy command to love one another, so that others would know that we are people of God, people of love, followers of Jesus Christ. And when we come short of it and we miss the mark, God's grace will be there waiting for us to help us rebuild. Amen.